kill him.
Thanks.
Got it.
Thank you. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you so very much. What a joy it is for me to be with you here today. Thank you for inviting me. I get to open the Restore Conference. What an incredible honor. You accidentally invited a Catholic. I love you, and you love me, and we love America. Astrid, in her moving words, she introduced this conference today, of course, on a relatively somber and serious note, recalling that only 2 weeks ago, a great tragedy occurred on this site, at this place. We're all paying attention. In point of fact, I was in Utah that day and the day after, and we were all shocked by that. Many of you live in Utah, many of you come from afar, but it captured all of our attention. And I want to start my remarks today by asking you a question. Why here? Why here? I mean, the heart of Utah, the least likely place. The heart of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I think not. And so here's one explanation. Why not? It's just like every other place. All the same problems, all the same pathologies. No, that's the wrong explanation. I'm going to give you a different explanation today. Here's what it is. It happened here because you've been chosen. We believe, Christian people believe, that you should never waste your suffering. Christian people know that when something bad is happening in your life, God is calling you, that you've been chosen for a great journey. You've been chosen to do something special and good. That's what I want to talk about here today. What have you been chosen to do here at Utah Valley University on this day? What is the new mission field that has been signaled and opened up by this tragedy? How will you restore the face of our nation? And here's my answer. Here's my answer. By following the most transgressive teaching in the history of humanity, to love our enemies. Now, a warning of what has been happening in this country, not just September 10th, but for years, came some years ago. It certainly came to my attention. Here's some prophetic words from 2002. Hatred among brothers and neighbors has now reduced sacred cities to sites of sorrow. It's beautiful poetry, isn't it? That's Russell M. Nelson in 2002. Imagine what he's thinking today. Sadly, it came true. So here's the question. Here's the mission. What are we going to do together? What are you going to do to restore the country and restore the world by loving your enemies? Here's my answer. Now, this is not a new problem, as I just stated. For years and years as a behavioral scientist, I've seen the deterioration of our society, the way that we can't deal with one another in any bonds of love or solidarity. In 2014, as an academic, and fundamentally, I'm just a college professor, even though I've done a lot of different things. In 2014, I was running a company, but paying attention to the psychological literature on how our society is behaving. I read an article in 2014 by 3 psychologists on a topic, a very academic, a very technical sounding idea called motive attribution asymmetry. Okay, now that sounds fancy, it sounds complicated, it's a very simple idea. And you have to understand that we academics, we take simple ideas and put fancy words around them and get tenure. That's kind of how the system works, don't tell. But motive attribution asymmetry is this. When you find implacable hostility and conflict between people and it can't be resolved, there's always a reason, and here's the reason. It's because both sides are making an error. Both sides believe that they love, but the other side hates. That's motive attribution asymmetry. It explains civil wars. It explains permanent conflicts among nations. It explains divorces. When you find a couple that can't get along, you'll inevitably find that both sides believe that they still love, but the other side hates. And that's an error because you know, logically, both sides to a conflict cannot simultaneously love and hate. Therein lies the solution, which is resolving an error. But it's a It's a big problem. And that's what this article was saying was happening all over the world. The Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the Rwandan genocide, civil war in the Balkans. And then in the end of the article, the authors went on to look and measure the level of conflict, the level of motive, attribution, asymmetry in America. This is 2014. It's a long time ago, 11 years ago now. And they showed that the level of conflict between conservatives and liberals, Democrats and Republicans in America, was the same as between Palestinians and Israelis. And I said, that can't be good. That's leading nowhere good. So I thought to myself, I'm going to see if I can find evidence of this. Now, what I do for a living is I travel around and give talks. I was running a company in those days, but still I was giving over 100 speeches a year. Now, you have to understand, I will speak to any group that seriously wants to examine ideas. I talk at very progressive college campuses and conservative activists, anybody who will have me. And on that particular day, I was in Manchester, New Hampshire, addressing a conservative activist conference for 600 Tea Party activists. And I thought, this is a good opportunity for me to test out this theory I just read about. So I got there a little early, and I looked at the roster of speakers, and it was 15 presidential candidates and me. That was it. And all 15 were vying for the 2016 Republican nomination for president, all giving campaign speeches. And then there was just me, a college professor. So when I see myself as kind of the odd man out, I know there's a reason that God's called me there. It's always the case. So I prayed beforehand. I said, Lord, what do you want me to do? And God told me, I believe, I think, he told me to do the one thing I can do that nobody else could do on that stage. You know what that is? Say whatever I think. And sure enough, I was listening to the presentations of the people before me, and they were throwing raw steaks out into the audience. They were saying basically, this is what you do at every political rally. You're right. And all the people who are not here, they're stupid and evil and hate America. I don't care if you're on the right or the left. That's what's going on. That's the heart of polarization. And so I got up to give my speech. It was on economic policy. It was very ordinary, not memorable. But here's the memorable part. I stopped in the middle of my speech to make a little experiment, a little social science experiment. I said, my friends, you have been hearing from all the previous speakers that you're right. And that all the people who are not here don't love America, and they're not very good Americans. But I want you to remember something. Those people, those neighbors of yours, those relatives of yours, they're not stupid or evil. They're simply Americans who don't agree with you on politics. And if you want to persuade them, which should be your goal, guess what? Nobody has ever been persuaded with insults. Nobody has ever been hated into agreement. No. You have one tool that will work, I said. It's love. It was not an applause line. No. But there was an applause line. It came right afterwards. See, but it wasn't for me. This lady in the audience of 600, she yells out, actually, they are stupid and evil. Now, I didn't take offense because it was a joke. It was a dumb joke, but it was a joke. It wasn't aimed at me or trying to repudiate me or no. But here's the point. Here's the point I'm trying to make. That moment was very clarifying to me because I just read this article and I just seen an example of motive attribution asymmetry at work. It was true. But I also saw in that experience the solution to the problem. Here's why. At that moment, you know where my mind went when that lady said that? My mind went to Seattle. Yay! Yeah, that's right. That's right. Here's why. We're going to make common cause right now. Seattle is the most secular city in America. It's the most progressive political city in America. My father was a college professor and my mother was an artist in Seattle. What do you think their politics were? That lady was talking about my mom. Stupid and evil? I think not. Now, to be sure, I didn't have their politics. I was the only one in my family. They thought something was wrong with me. You know, when I was in my early 20s, I remember my mother took me aside and she said, you know, your dad and I are really worried about you. I'm like, what? What could it be? She said, you know, I want you to know that we're going to love you either way. But I want you to be completely honest with me. Have you been voting for Republicans? So you get where I'm coming from. There was nothing stupid and evil about my family. I had great parents. They loved me. They brought me up as a Christian. They brought me up with my values of the radical equality of human dignity between sisters and brothers across the world with no exceptions, now or forever. That's my family. And yeah, they voted for a lot of Democrats. I don't care. It's not the point. But here's the clarifying moment of that. That's the offense that every single one of us has to take in America today if we want to restore this country. You know, my father used to tell me that moral courage is not what we hear on college campuses today, which is standing up to the people with whom we disagree. That's not moral courage. That's fine. This is a free country. But that's not moral courage. Moral courage, you know what it is, according to my old man? It's standing up to the people with whom you agree on behalf of those with whom you disagree. That's what it is. So how are you going to do that? Because it's easy to say. It's really easy to say, but we do want to get along, don't we? So that's what I really want to talk about. And let's start with the reason, by the way, that we have so much of this conflict that we're trying to deal with in the first place. Many people will say that we become too angry of a country or an angry nation. Angry, that's too angry. Yeah, sure, turn on cable TV at 8 o'clock at night and you'll see nothing but anger. Got it. But anger isn't the problem. Anger is a basic negative emotion produced by the limbic system of the brain. And here's what that emotion means. I care what you think and I want it to change. If you're happily married, you feel anger toward your spouse. If you don't, you're just not that happily married. Now, I'm a little biased. I'm married to a Spaniard. And for Spaniards, angry interactions are just a normal form of communication, right? But I do actually take a great deal of solace in the empirical regularity that I find in the academic literature that anger and divorce are uncorrelated. How much you fight in anger is literally uncorrelated with divorce. 34 years of marriage is the lack of correlation of anger and divorce, let me tell you. But that doesn't mean that anger doesn't have some connection to the dissolution. See, here's the thing. There's another basic negative emotion that mixes in with anger, and that's what we see today. It's called disgust. Disgust is another limbic emotion, and it says something or someone is a pathogen. We have this, it's been evolved in the human brain since early times of the Pleistocene to alert us to something that might hurt us or kill us. Before vaccines and antibiotics, disgust was all we had to make us afraid of certain substances that are too small to see the germs. Here's the problem. When you deploy disgust in conjunction with anger, you produce a complex emotion called contempt, which is the conviction of the worthlessness of another person. I've worked a little bit with a psychologist at the University of Washington in Seattle named John Gottman. Maybe some of you have heard of him. Yeah, Gottman's great. John and Julie Gottman, they run the Gottman Marriage Laboratory. They have brought thousands of couples back together again from the brink of divorce. Thousands. He's my hero, you know? Anybody who can hold families together is a hero. And how do you keep families together? Mom and dad are in love. That's a central ingredient. That's what it comes down to. And together they love the Lord. That's how marriages are supposed to work. So he brings couples back together again. And he says, I was talking to him on my podcast. I said, John, I read that you can tell if a couple is going to get divorced within the next 3 years with 97% accuracy, and you can tell in an hour. And he said, that's wrong. I can tell in half an hour. And I said, well, tell me what you're looking for so I can not do that. And he said, I asked them to discuss something of some contention in their marriage, and I see whether either of the partners rolls her or his eyes. Eye rolling, derision, sarcasm, dismissal. That's contempt. And that's the problem that we have in America today. That's what drives couples apart, and that's what drives Americans apart, and that's a habit. That's a habit of communication. That's a habit that I dare say we all have. You're watching television with your family, and your least favorite politician comes on, and you say, oh, that again. You've just expressed contempt, and that's registered with your children, and that's registered with your spouse. And if you do that to somebody in person, you've made a permanent enemy because their brain registers that as you expressing the view that they are worthless. We are, in America, like an enormous couple on the verge of divorce because of the habit of communication. Therein lies the good news for restoration, because you can break habits. People who say, we're too far apart on everything. I don't believe it. I just don't believe we know how to talk to each other anymore. We don't know how to relate to each other anymore. And it starts with this particular habit. So how do we break the habit of contempt? And by the way, when I say we, I mean me too. I was doing research on this subject and I thought, have I ever expressed contempt? Have I ever rolled my eyes? And I went back and looked at clips on TV. I do a lot of TV. And I saw myself doing a debate on some contentious policy on CNN or CNBC. I don't remember. And I was debating with a very nice woman who was across the aisle from me, and I didn't agree. And she made a point with which I took real issue. I thought it was ill-advised, and I rolled my eyes on national TV. And I guarantee she saw it. And I guarantee she didn't go home and say to her husband, I was debating Arthur Brooks on CNN tonight, and he was making some very good points. No. I guarantee what she said was, I was debating Arthur Brooks on TV tonight, and he's a jerk, and he's disrespectful. And I deserve that, and I'm sorry. But this is the beginning of the solution to the problem, isn't it? Is breaking that particular habit and not having people see us displaying our emotions, our basic emotions in this particular way. So how do we do it? How are you going to do that? How are you going to join me in doing just that? There are a lot of solutions that we hear out there from politicians that we need to be more civil with each other. Civility, that's the solution. That's the ticket. No, tolerance. I say garbage. No. If I told you, Esther, my wife and I were civil to each other, you'd say we need counseling. And if I told you that my employees at my company are tolerant of me, you'd say that I have a major human resource crisis on my hands. And that's because those are low standards for a great country. Those are low standards for us. What is the standard? You know what it is. It's the words on the Sermon on the Mount. You've heard that you should love your friends and hate your enemies, but today I give you a new teaching. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Those are the words of our Savior. And that's what we're called to do today. That's us. Now, it's funny because, Martin Luther King preached about that very passage, Matthew 5:44, November 17th, 1957, at the Dexter Street Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. It's a very famous sermon. You can watch it on YouTube. Well, you can listen to it on YouTube because there wasn't video. He had the flu that day and gave a better sermon than I'll ever give, despite the fact that he was flat on his back until the very moment of that sermon. And here's what he said about Matthew 5:44. Jesus didn't say to like your enemies, because to like your enemies is a sentimental something. Isn't he a beautiful orator? He said to love your enemies, because only when you love your enemies as an act of will and commitment can you redeem your enemies. And here's the point, fellow Christian people. This is something we can decide to do because God has given us the strength notwithstanding our emotions. That's the strength of the Christian faith, is to get up in front of people and defy our feelings, to stand up to Mother Nature, to offer it up to our Heavenly Father, and to love people. To love people. And not just our friends, but the new teaching to love our enemies. So, how? I got to get more practical than this, and I don't have all the time in the world. I asked this very question to the Dalai Lama. I've been working closely with the Dalai Lama, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the most important Buddhist in the world, and the world's most respected religious figure, by the way, if you believe Pew polling on this. And I've been working with him closely for the past 13 years. I have a beautiful friendship and relationship with him. He's changed my life in so many ways. I believe I'm a better Christian because of my relationship with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And I asked him when I was in the middle of this research years and years ago, after 2014, around the time of the 2016 election, and going forward, I said, Your Holiness, what do I do when I feel contempt and I need to love my enemies, but I don't know how to do it? And he said, it doesn't matter how you feel. Show, as he said, this is a very Dalai Lama thing to say, he said, show warm-heartedness. And I said, you got anything else? Because that seems kind of like a nostrum, a platitude. But then I thought about it a little bit. Some of you may know the story of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the leader of the Tibetan Buddhist people. He doesn't live in Tibet. He lives in Dharamsala, India, in the Himalayan foothills. That's where I go to meet him every single year. And the reason he lives in India is because he has been exiled since he was a teenager as the leader of the Tibetan Buddhist people. He was exiled by the communist Chinese government, driven out by sheer force. This is the oldest story in human history, that large, powerful armies of people with guns, that they bend right to might. And then those who've been bent are forgotten. But that's not the case with the Dalai Lama. It's the funniest thing because he's a pacifistic, poor people, and he's gone on over the subsequent 60 years to become the most respected religious figure in the world. How? By loving his enemies. That's how. By doing what he says. He told me he prays every day for the communist Chinese leaders, not that they will give him back his homeland, which he hopes that they will do, but that they will have good and happy lives with their families, and he wishes them the very best. That's what it means to show warm-heartedness. And then he told me how to do it. He said, remember a time when you answered somebody's hate with love. Remember when you did it by accident. Remember that feeling and you will recreate the action. And that was exactly right. I remembered a time in my own life. It was actually the first time that I came to Utah, which I've come many times since. I love this place, truly. But I had written a book. I was an academic. I was teaching at Syracuse University at the time. It was 2006, and I wrote a book about charitable giving, and I found that Utah is the most charitable state in the country. And it was a book about who gives and who doesn't, and who thinks they give a lot, and who actually doesn't give very much but think they do, etc., and had kind of political overtones to it. And I wasn't expecting anybody to read it. I'd written many books at that point, but they were all boring, and so nobody read them. I was a professor, after all. But this book got picked up by the President of the United States, George W. Bush, and it became like a big deal, and it changed my life. Now, when a book changes your life, a weird thing happens when you're a professor. You start hearing from a lot of strangers. People email you, and they feel like they know you because they read your book. And so I started getting emails from people who said, I loved your book, and my grandma taught me to give, and et cetera. But a lot of people who didn't like the book, they didn't like me, and they told me by email. I was getting unsolicited hate mail. I got a piece of unsolicited hate mail one Wednesday, about a month after the book came out. And this guy, he says, he's from Texas, a guy from Texas. Dear Professor Brooks, he said, you are a fraud, which is a bad way to start email. But I'm a good sport. I start reading the email because I'm reading all my email at this point. And I realize this is 5,000 words long. This message is going to take me 20 minutes to read it. But the next thing I realized is this guy was going through everything I'd written in my book, line by line, chapter and verse, and critiquing it, vitriolically, but critiquing it. And like the columns in table 3.1 are reversed, you moron, things like that. And I realized, I was thinking about, how do I feel? I was feeling kind of defensive, but I also realized I was feeling a lot of gratitude. He read my book. And I thought to myself, what should I do here? What should I do here? I'm going to tell him how I actually feel, because why not? And I'll never meet him. So I wrote back to him and I said, I know you hated my book, and I know you don't like me, and it's terrible, and I'm terrible, and everything's terrible. I got it. But I want you to know that book took 2 years of my life to write, and you read every word. I'm grateful to you for doing that. Thank you very much. Send. And then I go back to work. I'll never hear from the guy again. Oh, no. No. 15 minutes later, ding, his email's back up. And I'm thinking, maybe he wants to kill me now. I don't know. I'm very apprehensive. No. Dear Professor Brooks, he writes in the subsequent email,
next time you're in Dallas, let me buy you dinner. What? What just happened? That's weird. What happened was I returned his hatred with love, notwithstanding my feelings, and I changed the relationship. Maybe I wouldn't have changed his feeling toward me, that's entirely possible, but I changed what was in my heart toward him through my own behavior. See, loving your enemy changes you, not just your enemy. And that's what the Dalai Lama meant. When you love your enemies, you realize they weren't your enemies after all, because love and reconciliation to restore starts with you. Now, I didn't ever have dinner with him because probably right now I'd be chained to a pipe in his basement or something. Is that too edgy for restore? Anyway, I try to remember that every time I have an interaction like that. And what I want to tell you right now are the steps I try to go through to live this every day and that I recommend to you. Here's what I think we are called to do by the tragic events that happened over the last 2 weeks. Number one, here's not the homework. Agree more. No, agreement is a form of mediocrity. It's a lack of competition. I love competition. I like elections with more than one candidate. I like supermarkets with more than one brand. And I love ideas that are contested. That's why I'm a professor, is because the competition of ideas is fundamental to a free society. And if it were not for the competition of ideas, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints simply would not exist. And that's important. We have to believe in competition. And they wouldn't let the Catholics off the boat, that's all I can say. So that's not what I'm talking about. We don't need to disagree less, we need to disagree better. How? Number one, assignment number one for me, and for you if you agree. Start standing up to your own side. Start standing up to the people who say you need to hate to your own side. It doesn't matter if you stand up to the other side and say, those haters, they're so negative. It doesn't help. It doesn't help. You have no swing on that side. Now, I know why it's hard to stand up to your own side. I got it. I know the neuroscience of that. There's literally a part of your brain designated to make you afraid of offending your friends. We are, as Homo sapiens, in the Pleistocene, we were a tribal, band-oriented people. We lived in groups of 30 to 50. And if you alienated your friends and family, you'd walk the frozen tundra and die alone, and your brain still thinks that. But we're not the frozen tundra. It's just Twitter or something. You can stand up to the people who are hating on your side and hurting this country. And when you talk about that, it really matters. Turn off those people. Stand up to those people. I'm going to do it, and I believe so are you. Number two, this gets harder. No, I bet it for you it gets easier. Remember your mission. How many of you served the mission? It never stopped. It never stopped. Here's the thing. I've got missionaries on both sides of my family. My grandfather, who has served as the head of the mission school for the Navajo Nation, where my father was born, in New Mexico. He's a funny guy, great sense of humor. He used to say, you know, let me tell you a few words never before uttered in the English language or by any other humans. Here's words nobody has ever said before. I said, oh, Grandpa, what are they? He said, good news, there's missionaries on the porch. Fair point, fair point. And that's why the most effective form of missionary work is that which we do subsequent to our explicit missions in the way that we live our lives and people observe us in our behavior. That's the real mission field. So how does it work in a time of polarization and contempt and motive attribution asymmetry? The answer is we go out looking for the contempt, which is pretty easy to find, and go running toward it with our love. It's our opportunity. Online and with our colleagues, and we say, thank you, Lord, for this opportunity to stand up to the contempt and meet it with the love that you're putting in my heart, notwithstanding my feelings. That's the real opportunity. The way that we live our life, it's so funny that little things that we do, it calls to mind, the smallest acts. even in my own life. A lot of times when I come to Utah, because I'm here a lot, I come to BYU, I'm a scholar at the University of Utah on the side. It's my secondary academic affiliation. I just love it here. I take every opportunity I can get here. And oftentimes when I'm here and people have heard me talk a lot, some of you have heard this, they'll say, tell the briefcase story. Maybe some of you have heard this. I told this at a BYU commencement at one point. Forgive me if you haven't heard it, but this is an act of the mission of your church in my life and an example of how we can all be better in the way that we just live every day. The first time I came here, 2007, I gave a Friday forum at the Marriott Pavilion at BYU. I didn't know what it was. I just knew it was a speech for a bunch of students. I had no idea it was going to change my life. And when I was there, they always give you a lot of BYU swag, right? It's like advertising. And they gave me this beautiful Italian briefcase at Brigham Young University on the side of this beautiful briefcase. And I packed it up in my suitcase and I took it home, and I got home and my wife said, that's a nice briefcase. And I said, I know, it's Italian. And I got it from BYU, and she said, oh, that's great. And I put it in the closet because I didn't need a briefcase. Well, a month later, the strap broke on my briefcase. And I said, I just bought this thing. Can you believe what a crummy piece of work this is? And my wife said, go get that BYU briefcase and use that. And I said, I don't know, I feel weird about that. And my wife said, are you afraid they're going to think you're a Mormon? And I said, excuse me, member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I thought that was very insensitive of her, by the way. And I was also kind of incensed, I have to tell you, because I'm not afraid of anything, or so I think. So I marched over to that closet and got out my BYU briefcase, and I took all the stuff out of the broken one and put it in there, and I started carrying it around. Now, I'm on the road all the time. I travel 200,000 miles a year. I know you're jealous. And I'm in airports all the time. And I noticed that when I was in the airport, there's a funny thing, when you're carrying branded swag, people read the swag and they look at you. And they make some certain assumptions. And I could see it on their face. They'd read the briefcase and they'd go, oh, that's a Mormon guy. Because they don't know the way you're supposed to be called. They don't know it. God bless them. We're trying to raise consciousness here, but still. And I thought, that's kind of funny. It's sort of false advertising, because I'm a daily communicant. I go to Mass every day. I'm not just Catholic, I'm like uber Catholic, right? But it kind of amused me, and I thought to myself, that's great, But then I noticed something. It was changing my behavior. I noticed that when I was at the Chicago O'Hare Airport, I was passing a Starbucks, and I drink a lot of coffee, right? But I was passing on the coffee when I had the briefcase, right? And the reason is I didn't want them to make assumptions about you, because I imagine this businessman coming home to his wife and says, I saw this guy. I saw this Mormon guy with his BYU briefcase and the whole thing, and he was drinking a venti latte from Starbucks. I knew they were a bunch of hypocrites. I can't bear that. Yeah, so, and then I noticed something else that was actually more profound than that. I was being nicer. And the reason is because you have a well-earned reputation here for being of good cheer, for following the gospel of St. John. You have a well-earned reputation for this. There's a reason that this is called Happy Valley. And I got happier, and my life was better, and I was nicer to other people when I was carrying my magic briefcase. You know how Restore could save this whole world? Briefcases for everybody. But this is my point, my friends. This is my point. That's how the mission field works. Is in all the acts of kindness and goodness, and with a special emphasis on loving our enemies and praying for those who persecute us, and standing up to the world that asks us to hate our enemies, that is transactionalizing and monetizing us in doing just that. These are your homework assignments. As you're leaving this wonderful conference, you're going to hear a lot of speakers. This is what I want you to remember, that we've been called, all of us, and especially all of you, have been called because of the tragedy to do something that's profound and real. This country needs to be restored. It might as well start here. And if you needed a wake-up call of your assignment, it was September 10th. That was the wake-up call. That's not because something's wrong with you. It's because something's right with you. It's because we need you. It's because God is calling you to restore my country. So here's my final word and what I want you to remember. I was in when I'm on the road, which is all the time, I try to go to Mass every day, wherever I happen to be. And I was in a church, not my own. And I saw this sign in the church. And maybe some of you have seen this. Maybe some of you have this in yours as well. And it was a sign actually above the door. It wasn't a sign for people coming into the church. Weird. It was something for people to see as they were, after leaving church, going out to the parking lot to get into their cars and drive away. Here's what it said. You're now entering the mission field. Huh? Good. So here's the point. Here's the thing I want to leave you with. Loving your enemies is the ultimate mission work that we can engage in every single day. So let it start on this day in September 2025 after a great tragedy on this very campus. As you leave Utah Valley University, join me in imagining a sign over the doors that calls us by reminding us that we are now entering the mission field. God bless you and thank you.
All right, thanks so much for listening. We really hope that you enjoyed this episode with Arthur Brooks at Restore this year. If you missed the gathering and you'd like to hear more from the rest of our incredible speakers, you can still go to faithmatters.org/restore to purchase the recordings. Thanks again for listening.